Hello, and welcome to another episode of Babes in Bookland. I'm your host, Alex Renga, and my friend Jamie is back with us today to discuss Educated by Tara Westover. Before we get into the episode, I wanted to share another great review from Apple Podcasts. This one is titled New Fave from username Missy Montserrat. Really appreciate the thoughtful, personal nature of the host. This podcast highlights a genre that could use more shine, and Babes in Bookland brings the goods. That is such a sweet review. Thank you, Missy. Hi, Jamie.
Hey, Alex.
Thank you so much for joining me today to talk about Educated. You suggested this book to me, and I have to tell you, I did not know what I was walking into when I picked up this book.
Yeah, it's a heavy one.
I thought it was just about her education journey, but it is so much more. What were your biggest takeaways from the book?
It's been a few years since I read it, but at the time, I feel like everyone in my circle was talking about it. You are in my circle, so I don't mean to say that as if you're not, but my circle of educators, since that is my background. For me, I thought it was a really interesting showcase or case study, if you will, of white poverty, first and foremost. As a white woman, I feel like stories that we hear that center around poverty often, have Black and brown people in them, and getting to see or read up close about a white woman's experience growing up in real rural poverty, which is actually statistically, fact check me on this, but there are more white people on welfare than any other race. And that's because white people make up the biggest chunk of any one racial group in our country still to this point.
Okay, this is Alex jumping in here because I did fact check her. And according to a website called pewresearch.org, which used the United States Census Bureau survey of income and program participation, shows that the percentage of the characteristics of SNAP recipients in 2020, and SNAP stands for Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, 62.7% of SNAP recipients were white, 27% Black, 3.8% Asian, 6.6% all other race combinations, 27% Hispanic. All right, back to Jamie.
I think it was really interesting to learn about her experience just growing up in that environment. And then everyone loves the story of an underdog coming out on top. And she managed to get a college education in the end, and of course, be an author. So seeing her journey to have that happen was great. But my other big takeaway that I got, and that hopefully some other people did too, is that she was exceptional, is exceptional. She is not the rule. So seeing everything she had to do to get out of that circumstance, I don't think people should expect all others to do that. But I think it can shine a light on what are barriers that we need to do a better job as a society of removing to make that path to becoming educated open to more people.
Yeah, I agree. She had a lot of help along the way, and we'll talk about those specific people that I think were very important lifelines to her, some of them in her family, some of them in her community. And there was also a lot of abuse in her household. And I don't want to make a judgment that abuse and poverty go hand in hand.
Yes, the other big bucket of this, it was her growing up in poverty, managing to get an education despite all the odds. And then how does she overcome childhood trauma, right? And that can look a lot of different ways. But her story, it seemed like the people who were supposed to be caring for her had untreated severe mental health issues that resulted in how they raised her.
Yeah, how they did not care for her.
Right.
Said this is a story riddled with accounts of physical, emotional, and spiritual abuse. As I was reading it, I felt I have never really heard that term before or seen it used a lot, but I feel like it really works here because her faith was really important to her. And I think that it was weaponized against her a lot.
Yeah.
It's a story of a woman choosing herself over her family, choosing to question the world that she was taught to blindly obey. And she chooses this education because of the very actions of her family, I think. It was difficult to read at points. You could really sense the struggle that she had. She wanted so desperately to make it work with her family. She wanted so desperately to feel welcomed by her family and loved by her family, to the point where I feel like she put herself in peril multiple times. I think because the ties to our family can be so strong, especially when for so long that's all she knew, because she was really separated from the community growing up. Her hope for their love to come back around is heartbreaking, but I was just in awe of her strength and her courage. This book is about scholastic education, yes, but more importantly, it's about her education about the bigger world around her and herself.
The school of life, if you will.
Let's get into it. It was published in 2018. And like you said, really everybody was talking about this book. I've had it on my list for a while. So thank you for the nudge. And this is her dedication for Tyler, who is one of her brothers, but also that might not be his real name. There was a note where she said a lot of the names have been changed in this book. And I find it so interesting when people do that, because with the sleuths on the internet today, it feels like the truth will come to light. I don't know.
It's more of a lawsuit protection thing, right?
Yeah,
like
maybe
you all can figure it out, but defamation, because if I'm remembering correctly, I'm pretty sure she mentions that this book is true based on her recollection, but there were situations that maybe she would ask like a family member, how do you remember this thing unfolding? And what they remembered is a little different because our human memories are imperfect, right? Our human perspective when things are taking place in real time is, imperfect because we're all seeing things from our own vantage point.
I loved how she did that, actually. I thought that was so interesting. I'd never seen that done in a memoir before.
Right. Really,
and
everyone should say that.
Yeah.
It was like, oh, duh, of course. But
I appreciated that she did that, but also because later in the book, her grasp on her reality was challenged so much by the people surrounding her that it feels like she just wanted to do her due diligence with her readers. And that's one thing that we'll talk about. That was part of the emotional abuse.
Right.
Let's start with some quick topics. You know me, I love my new words alert. There were quite a few in this. I'm not going to read all of the words that I wrote down as I was reading this memoir because there are too many, but there are 4 that I want to bring up. Solemnity.
Does it have to do with solemn?
It's the state or quality of being serious and dignified.
Yeah.
So tincture.
Tincture. You don't know the word tincture?
I had never heard that word before. Why do you know that word? You take tinctures a lot? You got a lot of tinctures in your life?
Alex is not going to the medical marijuana dispensaries, apparently.
I am not. That's so funny.
Well,
okay.
Go walk into one and ask for some tincture. They'll hook you up.
Okay. Yes, because tincture is a medicine made by dissolving a drug into alcohol. It's typically an extract of a plant or animal material. So,
such as cannabis.
All right. Well, now I know. Now I know the lingo. See, I didn't go in before because I didn't know the lingo and I didn't want to look like.
She wasn't talking about that, though. Do you remember how she used the word tincture? Probably just like little medicinal stuff.
Her mother was an herbalist
at home.
Yeah. They didn't believe in medical doctors or
Western medicine. And yeah,
exactly. And then the last one is enumerating, which I feel like I've heard that word before, but I never quite knew what it was. It just means to mention one by one.
Numbers.
Yeah, exactly. To list things off one by one. You use tincture every Saturday when you go to the cannabis club, but
I do not go to the cannabis club. Oh,
solemnity and enumerating, I felt like were 2 that could easily be incorporated into our vocabulary. So I wanted to share those.
There you go.
In the book, as Tara goes on her educational journey, she goes back home often. And in my opinion, as the reader, it was frustrating to watch her fall back into the person that she was when she left originally, as opposed to remain steadfast in the woman she was becoming.
And just for folks who haven't read yet, correct me if I'm wrong, but she, despite all odds, manages to get accepted to BYU, Brigham Young University.
Yes.
She is Mormon. And you're talking about her returning from college to visit home over the course of time.
For summers, there are other times where she's just coming home for a shorter visit because she does eventually realize that going home for any length of time is potentially a detriment to her, or at the very least a setback of her forward momentum.
Side note, you know that my dad has worked in college housing. He's retired now, but I remember it never really occurred to me until he shared that there were students who during school breaks, were kind of at a loss as to where to go. So they would let students stay over winter break and spring break. It was really just summer if they weren't taking classes, but that might be a reason that somebody would continue to enroll in summer school because they don't really have a good place to land, during those school breaks.
Yeah, not everybody has a great relationship with their family. Maybe be that friend that opens up your arms and your home.
Give people a landing pad if you
can. If you can, totally. this made me wonder, because you and I no longer live at home or even
At our parents'
to
home,
where
right?
we also don't have the ability to visit like every weekend. Do you feel like there's any part of you, or is there any way that you sort of fall back to those old family dynamics or fall back into being more of a child or, your parents' child whenever you go home and visit?
Yeah, I mean, less so now because now when I visit, it's maybe for a week tops. But, I moved back in with my parents for the first year after college and then did teach for America for 2 years and then moved in with them for a year after that. So like I've returned to the nest multiple times as an adult child. Done with that now. Now I'm financially stable and married. As I said, I only go home for maybe a week tops. So that's not long enough, but those longer stretches, absolutely. I have a great relationship with both of my parents, but maybe, with mom, who is like a best friend, if I'm there for a super long time, then there starts to be more of the, bickering that was present in my teen years. Of course, not to the extent that it was, right? Because I've grown and evolved. But yeah, but that's also one of the things not the bickering, but I like being able to put my kid hat on when I go see them and be like nurtured and taken care of. But that's my experience. And I know that that is a privilege and not something that everyone experiences. A lot of people, like, they become the caretakers of their parents as adults, or even as teens, realizing that they're more mature than the people who brought them into the world. And it can be a stressful thing, but for me, it can be really nice to be back in that nurturing space. But, at some point, if nature happens in order, we will outlive our parents and we'll be the eldest in our family lineage. So everyone at some point will experience like maybe an absence of that nurturing environment as they once knew it. So how can we self-parent and self-nurture, right?
Yeah, well, and I think you can find a nurturing environment with your partner or your
Yes.
friends. It
Yes.
doesn't always have to come from parents.
That's the reason a lot of people lean into spiritual communities or other types of communities to get that nurturing.
That's true. Okay, last quick topic. Tara writes about how her brothers experienced her parents differently, presumably because they were boys, also because they were raised in a different decade. And I think it's true that each child has a specific perception of their parents depending on age and personality. And I know you have a younger brother. Do you feel like you and your brother experienced your parents differently?
In some ways, I think for the most part, we experience them similarly. We're just about 4 years apart. And, our parents were together our whole childhoods and still are. Yeah, it's really nice to kind of have a sounding board and somebody to share memories with to, be like, oh, that's so mom or that's so dad. But there are certainly some nuances to that. As the slightly older one, when my brother became a teenager and certain rules were more lenient for him, just like the way he was raised. I'm not sure how much of that was just like second child versus first child and how much of that was male versus female child rearing.
You should ask your parents.
Well, I kind of did call them out. I was like, that was not this way for me, blah, blah, blah. And the one thing I do remember was my dad saying, well, he can't get pregnant. Yeah, which,
But he can get people pregnant.
exactly. Yeah, I was not on birth control until I went away to college. I, in hindsight, wish that, I think parents of PSA as a non-parent, I would advise you to take your child to the OB-GYN when she starts to have a period, just like yearly, just so she can have those conversations if you're not prepared to have them around reproduction and birth control, etc. The talks I got were more coded of like, don't
Have sex.
do anything you can't undo. Or I don't even think it was that. I feel like we just totally didn't talk about it. But hearing that, I was like, oh yeah, versus you could have just empowered me to have safe sex versus being like, we're going to keep you on a shorter leash because we are afraid you're going to and might get pregnant. But I don't know. For the most part, it was pretty equitable. And as adult children, I feel like we're treated pretty equitably as well, which I appreciate. But yeah, your kids are different humans, so they might need different things from you. Of course, in this book, the parenting differences between Tara and her siblings was not unintentional,
Right.
like differentiation situation. It was, I don't know what you want to call it, just bias or favoritism or
Yeah.
yeah.
Definitely bias. Yeah. It was hard to read. Hard to read a lot of that stuff, to be honest. So, you know, my sister and I are 17 years apart. And so we experience my dad incredibly differently. Also, we're in different generations. She was born and raised with technology, and technology was not really a big thing for us until high school. And I think the biggest thing that my sister and I, the biggest difference is that she never experienced my dad as a coach.
Is that because she didn't play
Right.
sports or
She just didn't
because
gravitate towards sports the way that I
okay.
did. So she'll never have those moments.
Yeah, so that competitive spirit, I'm sure, comes from him in part. Thinking more about the gender dynamics, there's certainly households and, you know, whole cultures where women are really explicitly treated as second-class citizens to men and girls to boys, right? But I think I'm really grateful, and I think probably same goes for you, that to be raised to feel like we're no less worthy for being female than male to our parents.
Let's dive deeper into Tara's story. This book has to do with religion. There's no cutting around that. But she writes this, which I also wanted to echo. She writes, "This story is not about Mormonism, neither is it about any other form of religious belief. In it, there are many types of people, some believers, some not. Some kind, some not. The author disputes any correlation, positive or negative, between the two."
I like that.
And she's right. She writes about a lot of people in her life who weaponize Mormonism and weaponize religion. We know people do that every day, but there are really wonderful things about religion. There are really wonderful people who practice religion. There are really wonderful people who don't practice religion. I appreciate that she didn't want to paint something that shaped her so much. And that was really important to her at one point, her religion, her Mormonism, in just a broad strokes bad light. Whether as the reader you have your own takeaways, though. I also think that misogyny in religion was a really big theme in her book. In this case specifically, it was disguised as fundamentalism, which I wanted to brush up on my definition of that word. It is a form of religion, especially Islam or Protestant Christianity, that upholds the belief in the strict literal interpretation of scripture. So that's fundamentalism, is that the stories in the Bible are not fables designed to help us live as kinder people, more compassionate people, but that Noah's Ark legitimately happened, right?
Right. And that like closes the door to kind of have an evolving religious take over time, right? We see that in different religious sects that have, you know, become open to gay marriage, for example, right? But a fundamentalist religion would not do that. And if that was not how the book was written, right?
Right. Fundamentalism is a very black and white way to look at religion. But for me personally, you have to remember that these scriptures were written by men and they were interpreted a certain way. I just don't think that they were completely 100% unbiased,
Oh, of
as these
course not.
stories
Right.
were repeated and untold. And we also know that there were parts of the Bible that were edited out, and you wonder why. You
Hmm.
know, so I don't know, when you dig a little bit deeper, and that's been an important part of my religious journey. And I know you've had quite a religious journey.
To back up to what you said of her wanting to highlight that there's no clear like correlation between belief in a higher power and morality and goodness per se, that you can have all different combinations of those things. The thing that I've landed on that makes sense to me at this point in my life has been I don't care what anyone believes as long as they just do good in the world, right? Whatever motivates you to do that. And for me, it's just a moral compass, acknowledgement that I am a being in this world amongst many other beings, and I want life to be as good as possible for myself and others. So that's why I'm gonna do good things as much as possible. And at some point you get new information that challenges what you previously believed, and you either like shoo that information away because it's uncomfortable to be in that like place where your beliefs are being shaken or challenged. But ultimately it wasn't any one thing. It was just over the course of my 20s and now 30s of just being open-minded to new information and then finding like what works for me. And I think that I will probably feel this way for the rest of my adult life, but who the heck knows? That's where I'm at.
I think faith is having a belief in something, like you said, that you can't prove. That's really what the definition of faith is. And I think that there are some really beautiful things that I've gotten out of my religious education growing up. But I'm also proud that I was able to challenge it and able to let go of the parts or disassociate with the parts that no longer serve me. And I feel like no longer serve the world that I'm trying to build.
So you would not be a fundamentalist.
I would not be a fundamentalist. It's your life. You come to your own conclusions, but I don't know. I don't know how anybody can say with 100% confidence that they are right, because there's just so many different interpretations out there. And
when you realize that like most people, I feel like, do stick with what they were raised to believe. And it's like, if I had been born in a different country to a different family, like I would probably believe what they raised me to believe.
Yeah.
So I take issue with anyone who says like, my God is the only one, and anyone who doesn't align with this exact denomination's beliefs or religious beliefs. Doctrine, yeah.
It's like also one thing if you believe that internally, fine. But the fact that people are killed over this, wars are fought, entire religious cultures, entire races have been attempted to be eradicated from this earth through genocide because of a difference in religious opinion, or because they were able to weaponize using the difference in religious opinion. I mean, let's be real.
If we did know, let's say there was some proof that like it was all just made up, humans trying to make sense of their life, but really like there was nothing to it, then what? Like that just mind blown.
Well, honey, we know that the earth is round and people still say it's flat. Yeah, it's just one of those things where I am really glad that I challenged the beliefs that I was raised in. I'm glad that I educated myself. I'm glad that I stayed open, because I'm really comfortable with where I am spiritually and religiously. I want my children to make their own decisions. You know, we do pray before family meals sometimes, and we do talk about God, and it isn't the only thing that leads the way that we teach our children to be kind and compassionate humans, serving a greater good. It's kind of, I would say, merging the way that you choose to live your life and your beliefs. For me personally, it makes me feel better to be able to pray to God sometimes and just have gratitude. So I'm happy with that, you know?
I do love that for you, like in a sincere way. I don't mean that, like love that for you in a snarky way.
Thanks.
And I just love that like we have a really like respectful, loving relationship between the two of us, despite like having fundamental differences in like how we see that part of our existence.
Yeah.
But what's next on the Tara?
Her dad and her brothers and her mother weaponizes Mormonism against Tara, uses it to keep her in a specific place in their family dynamic. And there's a lot of talk about like purity and chastity and what being a good woman looks like versus really no standards or expectations for the boys in her life. She writes, Dad said a righteous woman never shows anything but her ankle. She also writes, when I told Dad that I planned to go to college, he said a woman's place was in the home. He said a lot more, of course, about how I was whoring after man's knowledge instead of God's. At one point, she's out working in the junkyard with her brother and father on this really hot day. Her brother takes off his shirt. He's so sweaty, he's like covered in mud. Tara is covered head to toe in grime, and she rolls up the sleeves. She's wearing like a short sleeve shirt, and she rolls it up to expose the tip of her shoulder. And her dad comes over and he yanks her sleeve down and saying that this isn't a whorehouse. And as soon as he leaves, she rolls her sleeve back up and she writes, I wanted to obey. I meant to, but the afternoon was so hot. The breeze on my arms so welcome. It was just a few inches. I was covered from my temple to my toes in grime. How could an inch of skin matter?
Is it Brandy Chastain? Remember the US soccer team? This is like 90s stuff, but it made international news that she took her shirt off after winning or kicking the winning goal, and she was wearing a sports bra. But she was just like, yeah, hot and excited. But then people are like, oh, that's scandalous. And it's just like.
Right. Whereas men take their shirts off all the time.
Fully with the nipple. Free the nipple. Just kidding.
Yeah, it's just the double standard. It was really frustrating for me. Words like, oh, she looks like a slut, and oh, that girl is like whorish. Those are thrown around so easily by other women too, when really it's kind of like, well, who's actually setting that standard, and who's the one who's saying that these things are slutty and whorish? Why? Because they're showing a little bit of skin
and saying that like, oh, you're supposed to preserve yourself for what? For your future husband. It's like, well, what if you aren't straight or don't want to get married? Then like, what are you preserving yourself, quote unquote, for? But yeah, it all boils down to like beliefs that don't center a woman's body as her own.
Yeah.
Which our bodies are our own.
Yeah.
And no one else's.
Yeah. And we've talked about that before. And it's not young girls wearing tank tops and miniskirts job for a man not to lure at them. That's his
Right.
ick and his responsibility. And I should be able to wear whatever I want. If you get turned on by it, that's on you. Why is that my responsibility? You keep myself covered so that you're not tempted to what? Molest me or rape me? Why should little girls keep themselves covered so that old men aren't tempted to lust after them? Like, that's disgusting.
And they'll still do that even if you're covered head to toe, like some of them, right?
Seriously.
So it's just, yeah.
Yeah.
To your point, yeah, we've said this before, you're not responsible for anyone else's actions, but your own.
So her father was this extremely overbearing influence in her life. But I also think it's very important that we talk about the love that Tara did have for her family and does still have for her family. She has a lot of anecdotes about the way that she was raised, and it's blatant abuse, as we'll get into a little bit further.
In abusive situations, it would just be so easy if you could turn that love off that you had for another person. But like, she's raised up in that, and until she gets capital E educated in the worldly perspective, it takes time to realize like that other people's experiences aren't quite like yours.
Well, for so long, her world was just her family.
She was isolated. Those were her people. And for better and for worse, she loved them. I think for any person who wants to effectively move past trauma, there has to be some degree of like letting go of harm that's been done to you. And that can look like forgiveness. And I think you can't, like, love and forgiveness go hand in hand. So I could see how that would happen.
Mm-hmm. She does a really interesting job of trying to justify a lot of her family members' actions, not just telling us what happened, but then later on, or even in the moment, telling us why she thinks her father was like this, why she thinks her brother was like this, why she thinks her mother was like this. And I think that when you are at the point where you are able to attempt to understand why the people in your life hurt you so much, why they continue to hurt you, it's coming from a place of love.
Yeah. And I think that she would probably say, like, her father thought he was doing right by his daughter. He wasn't, but like, he didn't think, oh, I'm abusing her because of this like hate in my heart or whatever. It was him thinking that he was doing what he was supposed to do as a parent. So
yeah.
What is that quote? Like, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. Like, I think this is a situation that applies to. But yeah, her being able to remain, I'll say, warm-hearted, right? She doesn't become a cold-hearted person from this. She stays warm-hearted by trying to understand. And you won't always get answers when you try and understand. But yeah, she's trying to like find a path to
peace.
Yeah. To find a path to peace.
And, she realizes he never gets diagnosed because her father has an extreme distrust in the government, an extreme distrust in medicine and the medical field. And so he would never get diagnosed, but she's fairly certain after she takes a psychology course at BYU that her father is bipolar and has manic episodes, and that this was a big reason that he was the way that he was. None of the children went to school. Most of them didn't have birth certificates. Later in life, they had to obtain them. Tara writes about how she didn't even know when her exact birthday was.
I don't know if you'll get to this, but I don't remember. How did she learn to read?
That was the one thing that her father wanted to educate them on. She writes that he says, all that really matters is that you kids learn to read. That other twaddle is just brainwashing. So he did know the importance of that, because you have to be able to read labels. You have to be able to read the Bible. At one point when they're younger, her mother does attempt homeschooling. So there are some homeschooling materials that she's able to try to self-educate herself with. Her older brother, Tyler, decides that he wants to go to college. And this is a really big deal in the family because the brother's older than Tyler. One of them is in a trucking business. Like, they're doing more trade stuff because none of them ever got an education. And Tyler kind of goes against the family grain in that way and says, this is what I want to do. And he's kind of allowed to do it because he's a boy. And he encourages Tara to seek education as well. He tells her that she's special. And then when she tries to ask her family to go to school, her father pretty much says, no, you're not allowed to. And when she pushes it anyway, because she also has Tyler encouraging her, and he gives her the path to BYU. He says they accept homeschoolers. All you have to do is score this on the ACT and you can get in.
The reason why I'd asked the question of like, how did she learn to read? I forgot that detail is because something that I think as an educator is like reading is the most important thing, right? If you can read English specifically in this country and comprehend what you're reading, if you're motivated, you can teach yourself anything. And that's kind of what she does.
Yeah, this is what she writes about her father's view on her education. She writes, "He made me think my curiosity was an obscenity, an affront to all he'd sacrificed to raise me. There is a power in self-education because once you have knowledge, then you can grow, then you can learn, then you can challenge yourself." And so my perspective was that Tara's father understood on some level, whether it was conscious or subconscious, that keeping her uneducated was a way to keep her subjugated.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's easier to control someone who is not educated than someone who is.
I thought that this was a really powerful book in that way. And I think I'm glad that so many people read it. It feels like people need to revisit it because there seems to be like a backtracking on our educational system right now, with all of the books being banned and all of the curriculum being controlled by very few.
And that's why it's really important to vote in your local elections too. Vote for your school board members, let your voice be heard in your community, because that's where you can implement the most change that affects you and your family directly. Now back to Tara.
Her father is in a horrific accident as she's older that burns most of his body. He refuses to go to the hospital, basically says it's in God's hands. At this point, there's already some contention between Tara and her family, but she's called to come say goodbye. I mean, she has a brutal description of him. It's honestly miraculous that this man survived this situation. And Tara reflects on their conflict. She writes, "For years, my father and I had been locked in conflict, an endless battle of wills. I thought I had accepted it, accepted our relationship for what it was. But in that moment, I realized how much I'd been counting on that conflict to come to an end, how deeply I believed in a future where we would be a father and daughter at peace." And that was really heartbreaking. Tara wants to be accepted by her family as the educated version of herself. And it's a struggle for her that she just can't be.
At least not by every person in the family. She still has relationships with some of them, right?
Yeah, at the end of the book, family really comes to a head on a point which we'll get to, but she's basically ostracized from her immediate family. She only speaks to her brother Tyler and some aunts and uncles and cousins. So not completely cut off, but cut off from people that she cares about still, doesn't want to be cut off from. And the circumstances too are incredibly heartbreaking. And we will get to that very important part of her journey. But let's keep going. So her father survives. And when you read this, you're like, how? I mean, it's really, do you remember that part of the book?
A little
it's
bit.
Insane.
Yeah.
And he says that this is proof of God's power to show people that there's another way besides the medical establishment. And he and Tara's mother go on to create this like conglomerate business where they sell her herbal tinctures and his miraculous story, and they become wealthy and they start adding on to their house.
Yeah, he just got lucky, really, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and the fact that Tara's the one who gets ostracized in the end, when it's like she's the one who's doing the
work.
Best, yeah, she's doing the work to be the best version of herself that she can be in the world, right? And to not cause harm to others, and yet she's the one who gets outcast. But I think people like you and I can't personally relate to that. Like, we are still close with our families that we were raised by, but I know of enough others who that's not the case for. And like, you either kind of go at it alone or you find a chosen family over the course of time.
Yeah.
But I'm sure it still always hurts to a degree to like not have, knowing that the way it's presented to society is like, oh, people who you're born to, like those should be your closest, deepest relationships for life. But that's not always the case.
She does have her brother Tyler. They seem really close, and it's not a coincidence that he's the only other educated person in her family.
Yeah. Thank God for Tyler. Like, what would her life have looked like without him? She'd probably still be.
I don't even want to imagine that. But yeah, I think Tyler helped the seed grow, but I do think the seed was always planted in Tara. But because she was a young girl, a woman, I mean, at a certain point, she would have just been married off. Yeah, you're right. Like her path was pretty much already laid out for her. And it was because of the help from other people that she was able to walk a different road. And one of those people very much was Tyler. So let's get to the people who helped Tara along her education journey. Tyler's the one who tells her about BYU. And at one point, he really encourages her to leave the house because she's finding herself in a situation that could grow dangerous. She writes, he said, "It's time to go, Tara. The longer you stay, the less likely you are to leave." "You think I need to leave?" she asks. Tyler didn't blink, didn't hesitate. He says, "I think this is the worst possible place for you. There's a world out there, Tara. It will look a lot different once Dad is no longer whispering his view of it in your ear." There's also a young boy that she meets, Charles, and he was the first boy that she had feelings for. She writes, "Charles is my first friend from the other world, the one my father had tried to protect me from. He talked about football and popular bands more than the end of days. He went to church, but like most Mormons, if he was ill, he would call a doctor. I couldn't reconcile his world with mine, so I kept them separate." Throughout her first few years in college, he also helps her navigate the real world, at one point helping her with her schedule, encouraging her to talk to her algebra professor when she was failing, and more. She writes about this moment where Charles tells her that he's angry that her parents didn't put her in school, angry on her behalf, and her first instinct is to regurgitate her father's words, but she doesn't. Then she feels ashamed because she can't help but believe that her father's words should be her own, which really speaks to just the conditioning that she had growing up. And I think that is such an important distinction that we all need to make. Are the opinions that we have a regurgitation of opinions that we have been told by people that maybe we love, respect, and admire? But regardless of that, it's so important that we find our own worldview and our own opinions on things and not just parrot these things that we're told to believe.
Right.
As the readers, we really see the division and the struggle within Tara to rectify what she's learning and how she's changing with her love or devotion. It's hard to find the right word for it, honestly, but maybe love still for her father and his ways and her family's ways. So we'll circle back to Charles in a really important moment in Tara's life that he is a part of in a little bit. There is a bishop at her church in BYU who starts counseling her. She really opens up to him about the way that she was raised and what's happening at home. And he advises her not to go home for the summer. He tells her that the church will pay her rent, but she doesn't feel comfortable taking the church's money. But he gave her language to validate what she was experiencing. She was never taught that it was acceptable to receive help from people. And that is something that is a huge part of her life education as she gets out into the real world. She does later write that she switches churches because she felt uncomfortable with someone knowing so much about her past.
I think her experiences at BYU and at the churches she attended there, like, are how she was able to hold on to Mormonism as her religion and not lose her faith entirely, right? Because you could see this going just as easily, her story of, like, had she gone to a secular college, right? Maybe she just would shed faith altogether and say, like, that's associated with my dad. But she was able to keep that part of herself and evolve it. Right.
You know, it really was interesting to me at the end. I'm not sure how
Religious she is now.
Yeah, that wasn't like a thing that she felt like she had to really talk about or write about in the book. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about her mother, and then we're going to talk about the one person who I think besides her father was the most influential person on her life. Her mother seemed to be this really interesting figure to me because at times she had a dominating strength and would go against her father's wishes, but in very small, almost unnoticeable ways. And then as soon as her mother was confronted, she would very quickly fall in line with Tara's father. But there's a time when Tara tells her mother that she's no longer going to go to BYU because her father warns her of God's wrath. And she writes, "She looked up, fixing her eyes on the wall behind me, and whispered, 'Don't say that. I don't want to hear that. Don't you stay. Go. Don't let anything stop you from going.'" Tara continues, "I heard Dad's step on the stairwell. Mother sighed and her eyes fluttered as if she were coming out of a trance."
It seems to me that her mom wants to abide by their biblical idea of she obeys the husband, who is closer to God. Husband obeys God, she obeys husband, right? She's like a degree removed. And yet, I think without her explicitly saying so, she seems aware that something's not totally right with husband, like whether or not she knows enough to diagnose that as like he has bipolar disorder that's untreated. Who's to say what she really thought of it? But I think maybe she would know, oh, he's behaving different
in an erratic.
Yes. And so that would be where she, in those instances, like, okay, I'm going to compensate for that by telling Tara these other things.
It's interesting because there's actually a point where Tara's mother acknowledges that her father is bipolar. And Tara's kind of like, wait, you knew that? And she's like, well, you're the one who introduced that term to me.
Yeah.
And she also completely ignores the abuse that Tara suffers from the hand of her brother, even after physically, literally seeing it with her own two eyes. And so that brings us to Sean. Sean is her older brother, and they have an extremely complicated relationship. When we're first introduced to him, the relationship seems like he's a great figure in her life. Tara writes that he comes home to help their father out with the business, and that Tara didn't really know him because he was so much older than her. She writes about how she sees Sean, quote, as my father, or perhaps my father as I wished he were, some longed for defender, some fanciful champion, one who wouldn't fling me into a storm, and who, if I was hurt, would make me whole. But we realize very quickly that she is wrong about him and his role in her life. He would physically hit her, choke her. He'd call her a whore, wench, the N-word. She writes, the first time I wore lip gloss, Sean said I was a whore. So again, the way that the word whore is just used to label women for really innocuous reasons in this specific family dynamic.
As if that's the worst thing you could be.
Right. Yeah, exactly. She's growing up. She's going to see Charles at the little play practice, and she's like putting on lip gloss to just, I don't know, maybe feel pretty or feel more confident. And the next morning she wakes up to Sean with his hands around her throat, choking her. He drags her down the hallway. Her mother is there. She's begging him to stop hurting her. But Sean just keeps calling Tara a whore and a bitch and a slut. And miraculously, Tyler shows up. Tyler, who doesn't live at home anymore. It was really crazy. You're reading this and you're just like, how the hell does Tara get out of this? And Tyler shows up, yanks Sean off of Tara, tosses her his car keys, and is like, get out of here. Like, you need to get away from this situation.
Like, he could have killed her in his rage.
Yes. And then later, Sean gives her a gift. She writes, he said he could see the path I was going down, and it was not good. I was losing myself, becoming like other girls. And again, this word other being used, synonymously for bad, frivolous, manipulative, using how I looked to get things. I thought about my body, all the ways it had changed. I hardly knew what I felt toward it. Sometimes I did want to be noticed, to be admired, and I'd feel disgusted. But now, as I gazed at the shadow Sean cast on my wall, aware of my maturing body, of its evils, and of my desire to do evil with it, the meaning of that memory shifted. Suddenly, the worth felt conditional, like it could be taken or squandered. It was not inherent, it was bestowed. What was of worth was not me, but the veneer of constraints and observances that obscured me.
Right. So it's not unconditional love, it is super conditional
Like,
love.
honestly, James, just reading that right now, it made me, I'm getting emotional because my heart just breaks for her and this world that she had to grow up in, where she's made to feel wrong just for being a woman, just for existing in the body that she had no control over. I don't know. It's like, this is a really emotional book.
Yeah, I don't remember if I'm sure I teared up reading it. But yeah, it's like, I don't know if Sean had an undiagnosed mental illness of some sort too, or if it was just like he really thought, I'm doing God's work by making sure my sister, stays pure, chaste, in line with everything, and like it's my responsibility to
make sure she goes to heaven.
Yeah, I do remember when you recounted the scene of Tyler throwing her the car keys and her going away. Because, yeah, even though Sean was like her brother, not her lover, you do hear domestic violence stories that end in the woman dying in out of rage-like situations just like that.
This is truly my first experience of seeing it be an account of sibling domestic violence. And it just opened my eyes to the fact that this probably is happening a lot more often than is being spoken about.
and the mom not doing anything about it. Like part of that probably being at a certain point when the boy becomes a quote unquote man, like I'm sure her as the mom is like, okay, now he is higher up on the totem pole of power and authority than me, even though she is still the mother.
But also physically.
Yeah.
There were rumors, Tara writes about, that he was like a bad egg. It's consistent that he's had some sort of behavioral problems, anger issues. She doesn't get explicit to what those are before her relationship with him. But then there's also a point where Sean suffers 2 accidents. At one point, he falls 20 feet from a wooden pallet that's floating in the air. They do a lot of work at like junkyards and stuff, like scrapping. And I think somebody does call an ambulance because somebody else is working at the junkyard at that point, and he goes to the hospital, and the doctors and nurses warn about his temper.
Sounds to me like he could very well have TBI, which has symptoms associated with it, with aggression. And
what's TBI?
Traumatic brain injury from various injuries.
He had demonstrated behavioral issues and things like that before. And then, yes, he does have a traumatic brain injury after falling 20 feet from this pallet. And she writes that his head injury makes him angrier and more dangerous. She writes, in the hospital, he had shown tendencies toward volatility, even violence, and that such changes might be permanent. Mother said I was the only one who would calm him. Reflecting on it now, I'm not sure the injury had changed him that much, but I convinced myself that it had, and that any cruelty on his part was entirely new. I can read my journals from this period and trace the evolution of a young girl rewriting her history. In the reality she constructed for herself, nothing had been wrong before her brother fell off that pallet. I wish I had my best friend back, she wrote. Before his injury, I never got hurt at all. And the incident that we just talked about with the car keys and stuff, that all happened before his fall. Tara writes about how she tries to convince herself that she is not affected by it, but then also that she is in more control over what happens between them than she actually is. She writes, it's comforting to believe that the defect is mine because that means that it's under my power. Like she's trying to convince herself that there are reasons why Sean is abusing her. And if there are reasons and she's in control of those reasons, then she's also in control of him not abusing her, because then she won't do the things that will cause him to abuse her.
She's trying to make it make sense. And you can't always, because there are really nonsensical things that happen in this world.
The same reason that you didn't get abused yesterday is the reason you get abused today. And she writes, it's strange how you give the people you love so much power over you. I had written in my journal, Sean had much more power over me than I could have possibly imagined. He had defined me to myself, and there's no greater power than that.
Ooh, but it's the happy ending, right? Because she gets away from it.
She does. She writes about seeing his abusive behavior play out with Sean's girlfriend and then later his wife. It was really disgusting to read the ways that his abuse was just ignored or not praised, but almost like, well, that's just he's the man. So if she's out of line, then that's what he needs to do.
Justified. That's the word. It was justified.
Yes, that's exactly it. That's exactly what they did with his abuse.
But fortunately, her education provides her an escape from this life and this family dynamic. She's able to get out of it and really reflect on it and think on it. And so really her going to BYU was just instrumental in her salvation.
There's value in higher education, regardless of where you go, right? Because you're meeting people outside of the community you grew up in. Certainly, she was taking courses on psychology that are, it's not all rooted in religious doctrine. There's a lot of just like general knowledge being shared. Like, while I wouldn't attend one myself, I'm grateful that outlet exists for those who want it.
You're right. She learned a lot of general knowledge there.
I think we should, as a society, continue to value education as a human right. We all benefit when our society is more educated. We've seen that with just economic prosperity, and you certainly don't want it to be the way it is now, where opportunities are largely decided for you based on the family you were born into, the economic status you were born into, the race that you were born as. That largely dictates your opportunities moving forward. And I did teach for America, which I won't get into too much, but the whole idea is that one day, they talk about one day, like the dream is that the zip code a child is born into won't dictate their ability to obtain a high quality education. We're so far from that, but yeah, I hope to see it get better in our lifetime for sure.
I do too. Okay, so back to Tara and her journey. One thing that Tara really struggles with when she's no longer isolated with her family is what it means to be a woman and what is acceptable for her moving forward. And there's this really poignant part of her book, a chapter titled If I Were a Woman. And she writes, "My love of music, my desire to study it, it had been compatible with my idea of what a woman is. My love of history and politics and the world affairs was not, and yet they called to me." And she's discussing this with her friend Josh, who's going on to law school. And she asks him if he were a woman, would he be pursuing a law degree? And he tells her no. And it's earnest. He tells her earnestly, no, if I were a woman and I wanted to be a lawyer, I would feel like something was wrong with me because women don't have that ambition. They have an ambition only for children and being caregivers in the family. That was really interesting to me because this guy Josh wasn't trying to be a dick. This is what he was conditioned and raised to believe. He hadn't been challenged enough at his time at BYU to second guess this. Fortunately, though, Tara seeks counsel elsewhere and asks a professor about this idea. And he tells her, first, find out what you are capable of and then decide who you are, which I love. She also discovers feminist literature while she's in college. And she writes, I had never heard anyone use the word feminism as anything but a reprimand. At BYU, you sound like a feminist signed the end of an argument. She talks about how she had never seen the word vagina printed out or said out loud. I mean, she is just having like a full education.
Yeah, it's like an awakening.
Yes, awakening. That's a great way to put it because it was more than just what she learned in the classroom. She had to work on her social skills as well.
Did have friends and roommates who would kind of be more compassionate to her. One of them had to teach her that she needed to wash her hands after she used the bathroom because she wasn't taught to do that. She was like, I don't pee on my hands. I don't need to wash my hands. And it's like, well, you do. And you also need to shower more than once a week. I mean, there were so many little ways that she had to learn about life. She had to learn that it was okay to ask for help. She did that in applying for the grant. She had to learn that it was okay to have other people take care of her, nurture her in a way that she didn't get from her family. She had to learn that it was okay to go to the doctor, that doctors weren't going to kill you, that they were going to help you. She gets strep throat and mono at the same time. Then her doctor prescribes her antibiotics. And when her mother finds out, she freaks out and she sends her a tincture to help wash the antibiotics, like detox the antibiotics out of her system.
And as you read the book, you see her slowly start to realize that these things that she was taught were really bad maybe aren't.
She struggles a lot in the book with external validation, writing about how she wanted to flee the room when a professor said her essay was one of the best he had ever read. She struggles with imposter syndrome, not feeling worthy of the opportunities that come her way,
including an opportunity to study at Cambridge. And she has such a wonderful time when she's there, but she struggles with who she's going to be upon her return to the States and to Utah.
And a professor tells her, quote, "You are not fool's gold shining only under a particular light. Whomever you become, whatever you make yourself into, that is who you always were. It was always in you, not in Cambridge, in you. You are gold, and returning to BYU or even to that mountain you came from will not change how you see yourself. Even gold appears dull in some lighting, but that is the illusion, and it always was." She just really had people who saw her in such a different way than she was made to believe. As I read earlier, she let Sean define who she was. So she had to almost seek others' definitions of her in order to believe that that's who she could be. You know, I think we all do that on a lesser scale. Okay, so she's gone to BYU. She gets into this special thing at Cambridge. And then later, she continues her studies at Cambridge. She's pursuing a PhD. And her older sister, Audrey, emails her.
Oh, I forgot she has an older sister.
Mm-hmm. Her older sister emails her and tells her that she was also abused by Sean and that she's sorry she never told Tara or tried to stop it for Tara's sake. And she writes, "I should have helped you," Audrey wrote, "but when my own mother didn't believe me, I stopped believing myself." She asks Tara to help confront the family about Sean. But Tara knows what's at stake, discovering a truth about her family that for her, once on earth, cannot be ignored. She writes, "As long as we had never asked, it was possible to believe that they would help. To tell them was to risk the unthinkable. It was to risk learning that they already knew." And of course, we know that they already knew because her mother witnessed it with her own eyes. There's a moment where her mother is receptive to this information. She has this exchange with her. Her mother says, "It is painful to face reality, to realize that there was something ugly and I refuse to see it." And Tara tells her, "Don't blame yourself. Your mind was never the same after the accident." Her mother got into, I'm telling you, there are a lot of accidents in this family that like people miraculously survived. It's crazy. Her mother also had a traumatic brain injury after a car accident. She writes, "Maybe, but sometimes I think we choose our illnesses because they benefit us in a way." Tara writes, "I asked my mother why she'd never stopped Sean from hurting me. And her mother responds, Sean always said you picked the fights. And I guess I wanted to believe that because it was easier, because you were strong and rational, and anyone could see that Sean was not. I'm a mother," she said. "Mothers protect, and Sean was so damaged." Tara writes, "I wanted to say that she was also my mother, but I didn't. I don't think Dad will believe any of this I typed. He will," she wrote, "but it's hard for him. It reminds him of the damage his bipolar has caused to our family. The illness gave me something to attack besides my father." When my mother asked why I hadn't come to her sooner, why I hadn't asked for help, I answered honestly, "Because you were so bullied by Dad," I said. "You were not powerful in the house. Dad ran things, and he was not going to help us. I am stronger now," she said. "I am no longer running scared. We know better. We can rewrite the story. You were my child. I should have protected you." So it seems like things are gonna go great for Tara. Her sister has come forward. Her mother believes her. But when it's time to actually confront Sean and her father, the ingrained misogyny in their family rears its ugly head. Their ingrained power dynamics prove to be stronger than her mother's strength and her sister's truth. Sean's behavior is justified and excused. Tara tells her parents that Sean had threatened to kill her by sending an assassin to Cambridge, and her mother replies, "He doesn't mean it, and he doesn't have that kind of money." I don't even know, can you call it cognitive dissonance? Like what can you call it at this point? Just denial?
Delusion.
The delusion that her family has. Sean is irate that Tara has tried to come forward about this and paint him to be the monster that he is. You thought that it was bad, and then it just gets worse. Audrey says basically that Tara tricked her, that she had a deal with the devil, and that she manipulated her into thinking these things about Sean, and that she forgives Sean. And basically, she doesn't want to be ostracized from the family. She realizes she could see how it was going to play out, and she still needed to be a part of the family dynamic. And so she backtracks on everything, uses religion to justify his abuse, and tells everybody that Tara was the master manipulator. Tara starts to resent her education because she's seeing what it's starting to cost her, which is a relationship with her family. She's reconnected with Charles at a certain point, and he wonders why she just can't let them go, why she has to fix it. And she doesn't really have an answer for that. She just knows that she can't let her family go.
They were her everything for so much of her life, you know?
She is at Harvard at this point. Her family comes to visit her, and she knows that they're there to reconvert her and basically give her some sort of exorcism. And she writes about how there's a huge part of her that wants,
or like an intervention.
Yeah, but
or an exorcism.
She calls it, she says, "I was ready to yield even if it meant an exorcism." Like there's a huge part of her that is just like, I'm so tired of fighting with my family that maybe this is the thing that I need to do. Maybe this is the answer, but she just can't allow herself to do it. She still struggles. She falls into a depression after her parents leave, and she still hopes that she can reconcile with her family. She goes home, even though her friend tries to warn her that Sean might actually kill her. She stops by her childhood home. She comes to the realization that this is just no longer her life, and it's not something worth fighting for anymore. And she grabs her journals and she leaves before her father and Sean are able to make it to the house. Girl, when I was reading that part, I remember my heart was pounding, and I was like, why are you going home? Like, you know what Sean is going to do to you, and you know that nobody's going to stop it because they're going to feel like you did a deal with the devil. She realizes that she writes her own history and she can write her own future. The final quote that I have is actually the quote that she starts her entire memoir with. It's by John Dewey. And this is his quote: "I believe finally that education must be conceived as a continuing reconstruction of experience, that the process and the goal of education are one and the same thing." To me, it's just, as you learn more, you can look back and see things with a new understanding. It's a way to grow, and it's a way to come to terms and make sense of your past. in order to grow. And it can be a really scary, challenging thing to do. I mean, Tara's education cost her a relationship with her family. We saw her struggle with it, even though she came from an extremely abusive household. And it still wasn't easy for her.
Reading her story was really educational for me from a anthropological perspective. So I'm grateful that she wrote it. I am grateful for her sake that she got out and empathized with the trauma that she experienced. But I don't know, would she be who she was today if not for that?
That's always the question, isn't it?
That's always the question. Would I be who I am today if not for having gone through these obstacles and overcome them? Yeah, we don't pick the family we're born into. All we have control over are the choices we make once we're here.
Well said. All you can do in life is continue to grow, to stay open, to educate yourself in all the ways that you can.
And I'm glad that she journaled too, because I think we spoke earlier about how our memory doesn't always serve us super accurately. But so the closest I can relate to her scenarios, I had a relationship at one point that I would describe as emotionally abusive. And when it ended, I wasn't certain that we wouldn't get back together at some point, but I wrote down, I just bullet pointed everything that I could think of that was something that he had said or done that clouded by love. What I thought was love at the time, I wasn't seeing those for what it was, but having that to refer back to at any point that I felt that I was missing him, or that it was oh yeah, I wrote this in real time. Those are my words. That is fact. That happened. So yeah, the power of writing your thoughts down, writing your memories down when they're in real time, or telling someone else too, who can pair it back to you. No, this is actually what happened.
Yeah.
And you had told me that.
I think that's important because I think, and she even mentions, it can be so tempting to rewrite our history so that we don't have to.
Actually, you were there for one of those moments. You remember the person who I was dating at the time of that wedding we attended, and they said something really bizarre. And then the next morning I came over to your and your husband's room and I was like, so-and-so said this to me. Are you remembering it?
I remember that.
Because I knew it was strange and I just needed someone else to validate the fact that it was really not okay what they had said to me. So saying it to you and then seeing your reaction, I was like, oh, okay. So my intuition that says that this is really wrong is right. I needed therapy after that for sure. And hopefully he got therapy too, because I just think of the harm that he's probably caused to other people. But I justified it as I knew that he had a really traumatic childhood, and you wouldn't know, looking at him or seeing that he's successful in business, what his background was. But he had a lot of unresolved trauma for that I think, explained why he was the way he was toward me and probably others. But it's not to be in the business of saving people at your own expense is not advisable.
It's not the business you want to be in.
You just have to have self-preservation has to be first and foremost, right? Put on your own mask first.
Yeah.
If you can save other people while doing that, great. But if you can't, we need to be our own parents at a certain point and take care of the one person we know we're spending the rest of this life with.
James, it's always so good to talk to you about these memoirs. I love you so much. I appreciate you.
I love it too. It reminds me of our deep talks that we would have in high school on the driveway.
I know. Well, that's it for Educated by Tara Westover. Jamie, thank you so much for joining me today. And now I will set you free to move about the cabin. You're the best.
Bye, Alex.
Thanks for listening to Babes in Bookland. To access the full version of this episode, you can subscribe on Apple Podcasts or support us on Patreon. Visit babesinbookland.com for more information.